All right, everybody. Welcome to EDF Live. This is a series of conversations with experts on issues that intersect environmental advocacy. Now, from the outset, I want to flag that although we've had very good Zoom luck in the past, we are at the mercy of internet connectivity, which in my house is being seriously tested with Zoom School happening just above me. This session will be taped and available to watch again if you miss anything the first time. And please use the chat function as we go to queue up follow-up questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. So a little bit about me. My name is Joe Bonfilio. My day job is running EDF Action. EDF Action is Environmental Defense Fund's advocacy partner. And right now we are pretty busy running a political program that I think is going to top $15 million this cycle. Now, in addition to our political work, investing in candidates up and down the ballot, from president all the way down to water boards, we have made a ton of voting resources available at edfaction.org/2020. We'll be mobilizing our staff and our members at a scale that we've never attempted before this election. So please sign up at edfaction.org/2020 to learn more. Even if you receive this invitation, you might not be a member of EDF Action. Yes, we will be sending you a lot of email, but it's for a good cause. This is, after all, the most important election of our lives, period. You can unsubscribe on November 4th, but until then, we're in this together. Now, I'm excited to be joined today by Charlotte Hill to discuss what will be a defining issue in this year's election, vote by mail. But before I begin, and we begin this, I want to acknowledge that we're having this conversation in an incredible time, and a moment in our history that I don't think I could have imagined that I'd be living through. To those of you that are directly or indirectly impacted by the Western fires, saddened by another police shooting in Kenosha, or continue to endure the enormous strain brought on by COVID, the EDF family is thinking of you and is with you. Each of us is doing what we can to get by and make progress, and the sum of those individual actions creates change. It may be slow, but it is there. These gatherings, virtual, yes, give me hope and energy as I see so many agents of good pop up in our audience list. Thank you for what you do. Now, today's event, to me, touches on a topic that quietly has big impact on environmental policy. When it is difficult for people to vote, their voices are swept under the rug. The overwhelming majority of Americans support action on climate, want clean air, and clean water. When they vote in mass, elected officials have to lean into these issues and push for progress. When they don't, they ignore this issue set. The very voters that are often cut out of the process are also most likely to live in pollution-impacted frontline communities. These voices and votes are critically important to our progress. So let's dive into a discussion about voting access and really focus on what voting by mail will do this election cycle. And we're gonna do that with Charlotte Hill, a PhD candidate at the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley, where she researches how election and voting laws impact political engagement. Her current research examines how voting barriers reduce youth turnout and how electoral reforms can increase voter participation. Now, outside of academia, Charlotte serves on the boards of the nonpartisan advocacy organizations Fair Vote and Represent Us, and she previously served as vice president of San Francisco's Elections Commission. Charlotte, thank you for joining us, and the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Joe. I'm really happy to be here to talk with you all today. It always feels good to feel like your research is useful, and for better or worse, right now, I think my research on mail voting and voter turnout is proving useful, and so I'm happy to share what I've learned, what my co-authors and fellow scholars in this space have learned, and what we are urging states and local jurisdictions to be thinking about in the lead up to the November election, and also what we're urging, regular folks who just want to see the election go well to do with their extra time. So what I think I'll start off with is a quick presentation on some of the stuff that I have been researching over the past year or so. Let me share my screen. So the big question that we're all trying to answer right now is, how do we maximize turnout in 2020 and also beyond, right? But I think a lot of us are focusing on this election in particular. there are two answers here that I want to give. The first is to overhaul the voting system. There are some big changes that need to be made, and we know from research a few of them that work really well at boosting turnout. But those reforms generally need to be implemented well in advance of election day. So I'm going to walk through some of my research on those policies. But given that we only have a couple months until November 3rd, I then want to talk about the small changes that that states and local voting jurisdictions can embrace that will lower what we call information costs, make it easier for people to understand what's going on with the election and how to vote, how to participate. And that will also lower what we call time and transportation barriers to make voting faster, make it easier to access physically. So first, let's start with those big policy changes. Some of my recent research, conducted in partnership with folks at Stanford and at the University of Washington, found that when the state of Colorado switched from in-person voting to what's called all-mail voting, my joke here is that we had all M-A-L-E voting for a long time in the US, but this is a different type of mail. When they switched to all-mail voting, turnout overall increased by 9 percentage points. That's a really big increase in the world of voting policy. Often the reforms that we're looking at seem like they boost turnout by a percentage point, maybe 2. Results look even better though when you break them down by specific demographic groups. So when we looked at age, for instance, and we looked at what the actual turnout was in 2018 in Colorado when it had this mail voting system versus what it would have been projected to be without mail voting, we saw that everyone benefited, but that young voters benefited the most. Turnout increased the most for young voters. These are some graphics from a piece we did in the New York Times, and they do much better visualizations than I do, so I'm going to rely on their visuals. We also found that turnout was boosted disproportionately for African-American voters in Colorado, for folks without much formal educational attainment, so especially for people with less than a high school diploma. And then for folks who came from households with relatively low wealth, right? We're talking $5,000, $10,000 of household wealth. As you can see here, though, everyone's turnout goes up. You know, and just to be clear, in case my terminology is a little vague, when I say all mail voting, this is a policy where everyone in Colorado is being sent a ballot that they can then fill out at home and either return via mail or drop off in a secure drop box or bring to what's called a vote center in Colorado, which is a professionally staffed central location where you can drop off your completed ballot, or if you happen to not be registered in advance of the election and need to register in person and vote on election day in person, you can do that there as well. We were looking at the mail voting component of this. So generally, we just see that turnout goes up a lot when you make it easier for folks to vote by sending them these mail ballots. I've also done research on what's called same-day voter registration. Again, this is allowing people to register to vote on the same day that they vote. A lot of states offer what's called election day registration, which is one form of this. You can show up on election day at your polling place, register to vote, and cast your ballot all at the same time. Other states also extend this backward a bit. So for a week or two before the election, you can show up, register, and vote in person all at the same time. So my research conducted in partnership with Jake Grumbach at the University of Washington found that SDR boosts turnout by somewhere between 5 and 10 percentage points, really depending on somebody's age. So another graphic here from the great folks at the Times, we found, once again, you see on the left-hand side that turnout goes up for every age group under same-day registration. But that turnout goes up disproportionately for young people who are notoriously the hardest to get to vote. And I'm happy to talk about that. That's a lot of my research focuses on why young people turn out at such low rates. But same-day registration boosts turnout for everyone, especially young people. And you can see on the right-hand side that this really changes the composition of the electorate, right? Seniors who have great turnout, have historically had great turnout ever since Social Security laws were put into place, and they had something to turn out for, to protect. They still make up a good portion of the electorate, but less than they did before. And young people make up a greater percentage. So there are some big changes we can make. And these can actually change election outcomes. So the last piece I wanted to say on this is when we look at same-day registration in, say, the state of Michigan, we can see that, Hillary Clinton probably would have won the state of Michigan in 2016 if same-day registration had been in place. Our estimates, all else being equal, you know, if everyone's voter mobilization strategies had stayed the same, and of course all these things change when election laws change, but all else being equal, Clinton probably would have gained about 90,000 more new voters than Donald Trump, and she would have handily won the state of Michigan. So these things have practical import in terms of the election outcomes they help bring about. But as I said, we can't do all the big changes in the next 2 months, fewer than 8 weeks until the election, but small changes matter too. And this is for a pretty simple reason. Small barriers decrease turnout, and small fixes boost turnout. If this is surprising to you, chances are you're older, whiter, wealthier, and better educated, because you probably have a voting system in America that serves you pretty well. You probably have a polling place that's really close to you. You probably don't have to wait in line for very long when you go to vote. So you might think like, I don't really know that small tweaks around the edges are going to change my voting experience very much. But in a lot of low-income communities, in a lot of communities that are predominantly, where predominantly people of color live, you'll see much longer voting lines. You'll see far fewer polling places. Voting is actually kind of a difficult process to go through. So making small tweaks can really change who participates, and especially in this election. I want to start by going through a bit of my research on differences in beliefs and understanding about the voting system by age. As I said, I focus a lot on young people and why they don't turn out. So some of my recent research has found that young people are less likely to have the information they need to vote. You can see on the x-axis of this graph, you have different age groups, starting with 18 to 24-year-olds going to the 65 and older. And on every metric here, young people are less likely to agree that they have the information they need to vote, less likely to say that they understand how to fill out their ballot, less likely to know where their polling place is located, less likely to know where to find more information about the candidates and the issues on their ballot, less likely to know the specific steps they need to take in order to register and vote. And this tells us that some simple voter education targeted at the folks who are least likely to have information about the voting process can go a long way. It can probably really help people understand how to participate and complete those steps correctly. I also find that young people are less likely to know the actual laws that are in place in their state. The one exception here is around online voter registration, where young people are a little better than seniors at correctly identifying whether their state has online voter registration. I think this is probably just an artifact of young people assuming that their state would let them register online, and older people being less likely to assume that. And because a lot of states have implemented online voter registration in the past decade or so, young people happen to be right about this one. But chances are they're guessing, because really on every other type of state registration and voting policy, young people are less likely to correctly identify what their state has on the books. And this matters because some of these policies are only effective if people know that they exist, right? You're not going to vote early if you don't realize that you can vote early. And you're probably not going to vote by mail if you don't realize that you can vote by mail. And it's also problematic if you think that your state has this policy and they don't, right? Same-day registration is great if it exists and people know it exists. But if you're a young person, you think that you can go and register to vote on election day, but in fact, your state doesn't let you do that, that's a big problem. So I bring these things up to emphasize the need to educate voters. The remedies I see for this year and beyond are to give voters better information and more information, and to give them easier access to voting. I'm going to walk through a few pieces of this that I see as particularly important for this year. So first, we need to give voters very clear deadlines with a sense of urgency about them, right? You have to request your absentee ballot by this date. You have to register to vote before this time. And we need to hit them over and over and over with this information. One example that I thought was great is actually from Kentucky. I was doing some research yesterday to see who's running ads that are eye-catching and that clearly outline registration and voter ballot application dates. Kentucky, it turns out, has some nice graphics. Lots of jurisdictions are trying to do stuff like this, but generally when you go to a Secretary of State's website, you're going to find a wall of text and you're going to have to click through drop-down menus to find basic information. Another group that's great at doing this, not in election administration, is vote.org. They have really useful info that they have on their website, same as Vote America. I have some links to these folks at the end of the presentation if you want to look up more. But basically, give people information in a visually compelling way. That's pretty straightforward. Next thing, smart ballot envelope design. So what we know from recent research out of the US Election Assistance Commission is that a lot of ballots have been getting rejected in states. Mail ballots have been getting rejected because folks forgot to sign them. As a voter, you're supposed to prove your identity by signing your signature on the envelope that you use to send back your mail-in ballot. And people just don't realize they have to do it, or they forget. So the Center for Civic Design is a great organization that gives advice to election administrations about how to improve their materials to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to do. And they have this guidance, like they have full-on template envelopes that you can copy directly from them, but it's probably too late to change all the envelopes you're going to use in this election. So what you need to do is just put a big X where you want voters to sign and use big letters and say, you voters sign here in ink. Just make it very, very clear. And it seems obvious, but a lot of places still don't have such direct instructions on their envelopes. You want to have multiple return options, right? Some people are going to return their mail-in ballots via the US Postal Service, but we'll talk on this call about challenges with USPS, and there's certainly a lot of distrust and concern around whether ballots will be counted fairly and accurately and on time if they're returned via USPS. So, and also a lot of folks don't have a mail drop box right around the corner from them. So we also want to have secure ballot drop boxes. Everyone on this call has probably heard some discussion about the need for these ballot drop boxes, but I wanted to show you what they look like in case you've never used one. They tend to be these big, bulky metal things. And this is a line from a Time magazine article that was interviewing an election administrator in a small jurisdiction, this guy Ammons. And he was saying, I ordered these boxes that are a 1/4 inch steel. They weigh between 250 and 750 pounds, and they'll be cemented to the ground. So if you hear secure drop boxes and you hear other people say, well, what's going to prevent someone from just grabbing the box and stealing all these votes? This is what they look like. If people aren't stealing the USPS mail drop boxes, they're not going to be stealing these either. It's a very similar design. The other thing I wanted to call out is that you don't want to do this. You don't want to do what's on the screen. So this is from the state of Michigan. It's a list of locations where people can drop off their ballot in these secure drop boxes. And this is, as you can see, if you look at the county column on the left, they've only gotten through the A's and a bit of the B's in this list, right? They have a 30-page document or so filled with individual addresses for each of these ballot drop boxes. No voter is going to sit down and read through all of this and map out the closest drop box to them. You want to do what the County of Alameda in California, where I live, is doing, and put together a map. Just it's a quick data thing. Get an engineer to help you out and translate your list of addresses into a map. Again, simple change, going to be much, much easier for voters to get that information. The last thing I want to talk about is the ballot curing process. So folks might have heard about this. In a lot of states, mail ballots can be rejected if they're not cast in time, or if they're missing a signature, or if the signature that a voter has on file from when they registered to vote or when they got their driver's license, if it differs too dramatically from the signature that they leave on their ballot envelope. And so states are increasingly creating these processes for notifying voters that their ballot is going to be rejected and giving them an opportunity to fix any problems. That's called the ballot curing process. And so there are a few things that jurisdictions can do here. One, you've got to inform voters about what your process is. I think California's done something great. This is an email I got from the California Secretary of State, which says, look, you can track your ballot And you don't, what's great about this system is you can enter in your info and you will receive push notifications to you if anything goes wrong with your ballot. So sign up ahead of time, and then you don't really have to worry about checking in regularly. A jurisdiction can do even better and have a really robust process for trying every, for contacting voters via their email, their phone. Some places even try to contact voters via social media if anything has gone wrong with their ballot and it looks like it's going to be rejected. The second thing is that you want to have a good ballot a good signature matching process. This is an example of a signature match process that I do not like. This is from the state of Oregon. And what they're saying is that signature 1 and signature 2 differ so much that this ballot should probably be rejected. I'm guessing folks are like me on this call and feeling really worried because my signatures do not tend to match any more than these two do from day to day. So we don't want to have the signature match process be so strict that we could lead to a lot of ballots being rejected. I will say Oregon has a pretty good ballot curing process where they can notify voters and let them fix problems. But what we want to do is err on the side of accepting people's ballots, knowing that signatures can vary a lot over time. So we instead look to what I wanted to double check this. I believe this is the state of Pennsylvania, but I'll confirm. I think it's the state of Michigan. They have a much more generous signature matching process. This is not a great, they should use real signatures for these examples because it's a little hard to tell what they are identifying as the differences between left and right for any given example. But basically they say, when in doubt, consider it to be a valid signature. And they even say this explicitly in their guides for election administrators. Clerks should presume that a voter's absentee voting application or envelope signature is his or her genuine signature, because there are a lot of reasons why there could be an apparent mismatch. You could get older, you could have some sort of illness that leads your hand to shake, you can be writing on a tablet versus on paper, you can have forgotten, your signature could just have changed. You could have forgotten how you signed when you turned 18 and registered to vote. Finally, I just want to give you guys some useful information. I know a lot of us are being asked by our friends and family, where do I need to register ahead of time? Is my state going to send me a ballot? Do I need to do this proactively? When do I need to send my ballot back by? And these are some great resources. Vote.org and Vote America, I referenced, are two nonprofits that have done a great job of consolidating information on every state and putting it together in an easy drop-down format. NCSL, the National Conference of State Legislatures, is an official resource that gathers the very specific legal provisions for each state. So if you want to dig in and understand, when is the state of Missouri going to begin counting ballots that were cast by mail, you'll be able to find that on the NCSL site. Through on the EDF action site here, because just a reminder, you all should make sure to go there and sign up. And then the last thing I'll mention is democracydocket.com. This is a site run by Mark Elias, who's the lead Democratic lawyer working for the DNC, fighting against a lot of voter suppression laws and also launching a bunch of new challenges in states. And they've got dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of cases that are ongoing right now. And you can find up-to-date info on the state of each of those legal battles there, which I always find really fascinating. All right, I'll leave it there. We can stop sharing the screen and get into a Q&A.
Thank you, Charlotte. Now we are relying on your research because we really haven't done this before at the scale that we're about to undertake. Even though there are states that are not going to have what you term all mail voting, I do like the joke. You should continue to use that. They're going to have an adoption of their absentee ballot process that you saw a state like Kentucky actively try to push to voters. One of the things that I noted in June, I think it was, that 85% of the Kentucky primary was done by mail. I could be getting that wrong, but it shocked me that people are aggressively taking advantage of these absentee ballot processes. Now, you lay out, not every state's the same, but let's start with the highest level question I think is on everybody's mind. And as I ask in these initial questions, please use the chat to get in queue. There have been some that have come in already, And I'll answer one that I saw pop up, SDR is same day registration for folks that were following along. And Charlie, I warn you, our audience is a little sassy today. I've already gotten some that we will not be asking, but we'll move forward. All right, top level question. Is the USPS ready for this?
It depends. It depends on who you listen to. So the Postmaster General DeJoy has said, yes, they're ready. Any ballot that is cast before a state deadline will be counted. There are many on the Democratic side who are skeptical of that claim. And I think that's informed by watching what happened in the primaries, right? Where you saw, for example, in New York, where I'm sure many of our callers are from, there were many ballots that were at least at risk of not being counted until there was some emergency legislating that happened. So what folks on the ground who are working on mobilizing voters to vote by mail are planning on doing is generally to get as many people as possible to request their absentee ballots, and then on October 15th, for anyone who has not returned their ballot by mail, they're going to start pivoting to asking people to drop off that mail ballot in a drop box or at their local elections office, which is generally the default place where you can drop one of those mail ballots off. So I will say, just personally, I think that any ballot that is cast via USPS 2 weeks before the election, I'm not worried. It's going to be counted. If it can be counted early, which it can be in some states, processed early, it probably will be. In that 2-week gap between October 15th, 16th, and Election Day, I would personally be dropping off my ballot in a different way.
Either to State Board of Elections drop off or a ballot drop off, depending on the state.
Yeah, and that, right, and that it varies based on where you live. There are active lawsuits right now in several states trying to make sure that voters do have those secure drop boxes, in addition to their standard USPS blue mail drop boxes. But if you get a ballot by mail, you should be able to, at a minimum, take it to your local elections office. And you probably don't know where that is. It's going to be at your city hall or someplace like that, but you can just do a quick Google search and find that.
That's great advice. Locally for us, it is our city hall, and there are a couple of satellite spots around. This is in Alexandria, Virginia. They're not hard to find, but you do have to look for them. And some of the resources that you shared earlier, we'll share with this audience and beyond, again, through the sign up of edfaction.org/2020. I'm going to see how many times I can get that in there. And again, we want those resources out there because there are organizations that focus on this, and it is their core mission to make sure that voters have the information they need. I actually noticed that there are a number of search engines that are also serving this up. If you even put in your interest in these topics, you're catching this on Google and other things. So here's my next question, and this is one that I've gotten time and again. Does an all mail voting system or relying on vote by mail benefit one party or the other?
That's a good question. No, the short answer is no. So there's been a lot of research on this, especially in the past year. I want to say at least 3 papers, at least a couple published, peer-reviewed papers, and then my research, which is currently under review, all finds that there is no partisan benefit to an all-mail voting system. I do think it's important to note that things might look different this year. So what do we mean by there being a partisan benefit to a mail voting system? Well, what most people mean is that the voters who tend to support Democrats would be more likely to use it than the voters who tend to support Republicans, or vice versa, right? And we have not found that to be the case. We have not found that. So in Colorado, in my research, we found that Democrats and Republicans both looked to get about an 8 percentage point participation boost from the switch to mail voting. And those kind of results are found in other papers as well. But in this election cycle, because mail voting has been, because Donald Trump, frankly, has been criticizing mail voting, a lot of Republican voters are now saying that they will not vote by mail, that they're going to vote in person, and vice versa for Democrats, right? As soon as you would infuse a policy with a partisan kick, put it through that partisan lens, you're going to start seeing voters separate by party in terms of how they plan to engage with the policy. So what most scholars expect to see is that Democrats are going to vote by mail. And so when you just look at the mail vote, you're going to see a big Democratic, advantage, and vice versa for in-person voting. So the fear is that some folks who have an interest in taking down mail voting are going to look at that data and say, hey, look, all mail voting actually really does benefit Democrats. It's just a Democratic ploy. And that's not what we've seen so far. It may be what we see in this election, but it's not really because of the mail voting policy itself. It's because of the rhetoric that we see emerging from political leaders.
It's interesting, even in the voting we've seen early in these primaries, that discrepancy is weighted in ways that you would not have expected. Just generally, the process to play out. So I think it's a good flag, because I think there is going to be a push for making voting just easier and learning the lessons that we can out of COVID to do that. That push is going to be skewed because these issues have become so hot button. And in states like Colorado and out west or California, that wasn't the intent. There was no intent of sort of a partisan skew when implementing those policies.
Yeah, and let's be real. I mean, the folks who tend to vote at the lowest rates in this country are largely doing so because of the design of the voting system, right? Our voting policies were not originally meant to empower everyone to have equal access to the voting booth. And so you see reforms that aim to increase participation, sort of by design, they're targeting voters who are not currently being served by our existing voting laws. And a lot of those voters also happen with the current party makeup to support Democrats. None of that's written in stone. I always like to say, if the Republican Party wanted to gear its policies towards serving Black voters and really try to lure those voters into their fold, they could do it. It might take a while, but they could certainly pass those types of policies. So I think it's important to separate out these questions and recognize any policy we pass that's going to try to make voting easier is probably going to be directed at folks who, in this moment in time, are a little more likely to support Democratic candidates. That doesn't make them partisan policies. It just makes them policies aimed at leveling the playing field that currently is not level.
All right, so folks watching, use the Q&A little bubbles there to ask some questions. I'm gonna ask one. I know this is just folly, but I'm doing it anyway. All right, let's look past 2020. What should we be thinking about or what should states be doing? What should the federal government be doing to expand all mail-in voting or just expand the access to the vote if we're doing this right?
It's a good question. What I think a lot of people, who aren't, election security scholars and election policy scholars say is like, why aren't we doing this online? Right? Like, why aren't we just voting online? Wouldn't that make things easier? I can bank online. I can do a lot of things I care about over the internet. And so I like to start there and say, why are we not doing the obvious thing? Because we haven't figured out a way to do it securely. And we can get into the details of that, not on this call. We don't have time, but basically it has to do with needing people's votes to be anonymous, but also needing to make sure that we know who's casting a ballot. And so figuring out that process in a digital format and making sure that the folks running the technology can't get access to the kind of information they might want to if they were malicious. It gets really, really tricky. And despite a lot of claims from online voting vendors, we actually haven't figured out a way to do that well. So that's why we're not going that way. So then we look, what are the next best options? And it looks like letting people vote, we call it voting from home, generally in this community, because you're getting your ballot by mail, but you can fill it out at home and cast it in a variety of ways. That does seem to be the big reform that has the biggest impact on increasing turnout from folks who are already registered to vote. And then the other piece I would say, drawing on some of that research I presented earlier, is also to make sure that we have same-day voter registration, because there are a lot of folks who don't really so part of the problem is that a lot of folks don't pay attention to the election until it's election week, at which point it's too late to register to vote, and they may really want to participate, but they've just missed the window and they didn't think to register ahead of time. There are also a lot of people who can't afford to take the time to go to the DMV and register, or who don't really know what the process is. And so even if they would have registered to vote well in advance of the election, because they're unaware of the process or they don't have the time to participate in that way at that moment, they end up missing the window. So when you combine same-day registration with mail voting, you get astronomically high turnout. So Colorado has both, and you can see there that they get upwards of around 80% of folks participating in an election, which is quite high. And you see similarly high rates in states like Washington and Oregon that also have these robust sets of policies. I will say, in terms of what we do, like how do we make it happen? Elections are run on a state-by-state level. So it really comes down to people asking their lawmakers to prioritize this. That's what happened in the state of Washington a couple of years ago. There was a really big grassroots effort to push for voting policy reform. And I want to say it was maybe 6 different laws came out in rapid succession when the Washington legislature flipped and Democrats were in power. They decided to prioritize these things, and you just saw like automatic voter registration and SDR and one thing after another, and turnout has increased pretty dramatically there.
So the folks that are on our webinar today actually submitted some questions prior to joining, and I want to hit a couple of these and then touch on them a little bit, but maybe go back and underscore them. Roughly how many states are doing all mail-in voting? And so I'll expand on that. How many states would you expect really have an aggressive push this year for an expanded absentee program?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it highlights how hard it is to follow this stuff in general, because every state has a different system, and then in this year in particular, because so many moving parts have been changing really rapidly. So what we have right now is I want to say 6 states. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8. I guess 8 states that will mail ballots to all voters. So you won't have to, or sorry, I'm forgetting one. So 9 states, and then Washington, D.C. actually, because a few of them are doing this for the first time this year, where they'll mail ballots to all voters. You don't have to apply for a mail-in ballot. It's just going to be sent to you. You've then got another 34 states where you will be able to vote absentee, vote using one of these mail-in ballots after you've requested it, and where you won't have to specify any reason for asking for that ballot. Or a few of those you do have to specify a reason, but you can just cite COVID concerns, right? So virtually everyone has an opportunity to request that mail-in ballot. There are remaining 9 states where sorry, I got that figure wrong. There are, I want to say, a remaining 7 states, there we go, that still require voters to provide a reason beyond the coronavirus to vote absentee. So usually that's that you're serving in the military abroad, or you have some sort of documentation from your doctor that you won't be able to vote in person. So it can be quite difficult in those 7 states. And so those are the places where we're just going to see in-person voting have to happen. And those are places like Texas and Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, and a fair number of southern states. It's like there's a second part of your question that I'm missing.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was wondering if I had missed a second part of the question.
You killed it. You killed it. That was awesome. I was going to add that on edfaction.org/2020, if you scroll down, you'll notice that we are actually tracking some of the rules in key battleground states. We're doing this because we are calibrating our political program to it, but folks following along with us that really want to geek out with you and me on these issues, we have access to a treasure trove of stuff that our teams put together to sort of see and almost game out how some of these rule changes, either early in the process when COVID first hit, or are happening pretty late in the game, may impact some of these states where you have a contested Senate election, or you have a swing state for the presidential. So we have that up right now. Thank you, Maggie, for throwing it up on the website. I'm going to try to get it in at least 7 more times by the time we're just as a personal challenge. See if I can drive people to that website. All right, let's go to a couple that are coming in from our team here, and forgive me as I sort of look over here to the Starship Enterprise setup I have here at home. I'm going to combine two. First, are you seeing impact, or have you seen impact with postcard programs where volunteers write to low propensity voters? And I'm going to add that to maybe your specialty. What are your best ways to reach young people and encourage them to vote, or more marginalized voters for this election?
This is a great question, and it's a question I get all the time, right? What do I do? Basically, what do I do as a person who cares about boosting turnout to maximize my impact? And so let me tell you first what data we have, and I'll tell you what some of the gaps are and what we know. So a lot of the data that we have on what works at mobilizing voters comes from either published scholarship or from, at least on the left, a group called the Analyst Institute, which works with liberal and democratic organizations to run a bunch of field experiments, right, where they test a bunch of things against each other and figure out what's working. And they also measure the cost effectiveness of different tactics, looking at the budgets of the organizations running those programs. So they'll put out a list every year of like, here's what we know about what the most effective thing is that you can do. There are a few big takeaways. We know that that right now, the data suggests that all relational forms of contact are highly effective. So you're going to have a much bigger impact if you reach out to your friends and family who know you than if you reach out to strangers, right? So the number one thing is think about who you know, who lives in a swing state, if anybody, and make sure that they are mobilized, and then make sure that they have a plan for how they're going to reach out to their friends and family, because they're going to be the best connected in those states, right? We also know that hitting people in multiple different channels is much better than hitting them through just one channel. So this is where I get into the kind of wishy-washy answer of like, do the kind of outreach that motivates you the most. Like if you're excited to send postcards, but the idea of calling people up on the phone just like makes you feel uncomfortable, then write the postcard. If you're someone who likes to sit and click send on a bunch of text messages one after another, you should do that. We do know that the most cost-effective form of outreach in general tends to be mail that is sent to folks. But that's generally like form mail, because you can do it pretty quickly. Once you start writing things out, it takes more time, so it becomes a little bit less efficient. So then the second and third most cost-effective tactics are sending text messages and making phone calls. Texts are not that effective on an individual basis, but because you can send so many in rapid succession. I don't know if anyone here has used one of these software platforms, but it's illegal to send a bulk text message to a bunch of folks automatically unless they've opted in to hear from you. So now there are companies that let you just click send, 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 and they say that's sending them manually. You're not doing it automatically, but you can still do it really quickly. We do know, so, and I know EDF Action is putting together a lot of great ways for people to participate. I also know Vote Forward is probably the top organization that's having people write these handwritten letters to send to swing state voters. There are a lot of great groups doing texting. I'm happy to put people in touch with them if interested. When it comes to contacting low propensity voters, that's where our data starts getting thinner. There's a lot of research into like, what do we see in terms of overall aggregate turnout increases from this type of outreach versus another, less on what works for those kind of subgroups. But we do know that we know what modes of communication different types of people pay attention to the most. So young people tend to be really receptive to text messages and to social on the platforms where they are, right? Young people are not on Facebook as much, so Facebook ads aren't going to be as effective, but Instagram, Snapchat, platforms like that. Older folks do tend to be on like Facebook more, so they'll be a little more receptive to those ads, but the letters and phone calls tend to be a little better for mobilizing older folks.
Awesome.
That's a lot of information thrown at you.
No, that's fantastic. I'm going to let you take a drink of water. I'm going to mention to this group that on September 24th, we are hosting another webinar 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 p.m. Pacific time, specifically on how EDF Action is organizing our members this cycle. Now I'm going to ask Paul's question, which is I'm going to answer, so it's a bit awkward. I'm asking myself a question, but bear with me, friends. Paul asks, is EDF Action working with LCV and other groups in promoting voting and GOTV efforts, or instead focusing on its own particular set of supporters? How best to ensure that those of us supporting GOTV efforts are funding in an efficient manner? Paul, I think this is great. This is a great segue to, again, what you're seeing us do, but in collaboration with others. So although EDF Action is driving folks to edfaction.org/2020 and urging signups, we're doing so that we can plug into an effort called the Green Wave. The Green Wave is a community-led effort by the major C4s. We are pooling our resources and pooling our members to operate on one program. It is in our view, the most efficient way for us to engage in this election and work with others to share those costs. And again, mobilize the green community in total and not just folks that are EDF Action members. I'd like to think that you all are super loyal to us, but I also know that you're likely talking and working with LCV and Sierra Club and NRDC and a bunch of other great groups. We know that, and we're working together to make sure that that gets done. All right, to Bob's question here, which I really like, and this one may be hard. Several times, Trump has suggested that voters test the system by casting a vote by mail ballot and then trying to cast an in-person vote on election day. This may cause unnecessary delays at polling places. What can local jurisdictions do to proactively address this problem?
Well, they're already trying to do it. I follow and am fortunate enough to be friends with a number of election administrators, in part from having served on the San Francisco Elections Commission for a period of time. And what they're doing is trying to tell people, stop listening to President Trump. He's encouraging voter fraud, whether intentionally or not. And that's sort of the best we can do. I mean, in terms of the practical implementation of that, it's a lot of signage, it's a lot of contacting people through different channels, as we've talked about. There's no silver bullet here. But just to be clear, if you cast a ballot via mail, you should not go cast a ballot in person as well. Election offices do generally have systems for dealing with that. They will invalidate one of your ballots, but if you do this knowingly, you're subject to penalties and possibly imprisonment. It is considered voter fraud. So don't do it. And this is the message that election officers are now having to push out through every channel they have at their disposal.
Yeah, you said it, and I think this is a time to sort of bring up something that we talked about earlier. This concept of voter fraud, or people actively trying to defraud an election in mass, is one of the main drivers of these, or at least arguments for some of these more restrictive voting blocks, or as a voter ID laws, or or the signature match. There was a Washington Post column by a prominent Republican attorney who had been working on election laws for as long as I've been alive, that just laid out, I think, really importantly, that these fraud cases are few and far between and certainly don't impact elections. Talk a little bit about that, and we'll share that link for folks that they're still here with us.
Right. So this was Ben Ginsburg, very prominent Republican lawyer who has been at the front lines of trying to identify cases of voter fraud. And what he calls out in his op-ed is that the Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank, a very prominent think tank, has an election fraud database that has compiled evidence of any kind of voter fraud that they could since the early 1980s. The database has a total of 1,296 incidents in it. This is compared to just millions and millions of votes cast since the early 1980s. There was another study he cited that found just 372 possible cases of illegal voting, not even cases that were prosecuted, out of 14.6 million votes cast in the 2016 and 2018 general elections. So that's 372 out of 14.6 million. That comes out to 0.0025% of votes possibly cast fraudulently. So there are books you can read about this where scholars are trying to, the Brennan Center commissioned one at one point where they're trying to figure out how much is voting fraud a problem. And it's just not. And those of us who do this work are honestly tired. We just feel like we're saying it day after day after day. And the reality is, people don't make up their minds about what they believe based on data. By and large, they make it up based on identity. And do the people that I trust say that this is a problem, or do they not? And so long as the head of one of the two major political parties in our country is saying that this is a big problem, a good portion of voters, 30, 40, 50% of voters are going to think that it's a problem. So I think that pushing out the correct information repeatedly and regularly is useful, but really how you're going to address concerns about voting fraud, that's a much bigger question about how we tackle problems of partisanship and misinformation in this country. I think it goes it's a much bigger issue than just the 2020 election.
Absolutely. I think we should very well be using every channel we have and talking about this, because the research is there, and certainly prominent voices are there to, again, lend credibility here. All right, I'm going to actually answer a question that popped up. Bill asked, analyst, and couldn't get the other name of the organization. Bill is the Analyst Institute. EDF Action, EDF, and a number of other progressive organizations work with them to make sure that we're doing the most efficient thing that we possibly can to reach voters and reach constituents in key districts. They are a fantastic organization, and we have both been part of and funded research studies that they have used and given to others, and utilized their stuff extensively in how we design programs. So thanks for that question. Now Sally asks, and points out, and I'm asking you, Charlotte, you can fill out the ballot at home and then take it to the voting place on election day, right?
It depends on where you live. Where I live in California, yes, you can. You can I can drop off my the ballot that was mailed to me at my polling place. That is not the case in every state. So I would encourage you to use one of the resources that I shared, or just do a Google search to confirm that.
Fantastic. I have a couple here that I just want to sort of begin to wrap us up with. And this is interesting. We'll see what you do with this one, Charlotte. This is, what is the greatest danger of voting by mail? What is the greatest danger, including foreign or in-country efforts to confuse or undermine voting from particular groups?
Well, there are dangers inherent in voting. There's misinformation danger regardless of the method of vote that you choose to use. The greatest danger for voting by mail, I think, at least at this particular moment, there have been so many changes made so quickly that I think a lot of voters are confused and just feeling a sense of insecurity and anxiety around the voting process that maybe they didn't feel before. And we know that those types of emotions can be really demobilizing. We know that anger is like a great mobilizer often in elections, and fear and anxiety are demobilizers. So this isn't specific, I guess, to mail voting, but it's specific to how we're seeing mail voting play out in this particular election. I do fear that there have been so many changes to our election policies so quickly that we're going to see people finding themselves on the fence about whether to turn out, whereas otherwise they would just know their plan and they would turn out in person.
And the best way to combat that is to get information into people's hands as best they can. All right, yeah. Easy one. And after that one, easy one. How are you voting?
I'm voting by mail. I live in California. It's wonderful. They're sending me my ballot. I don't have to, I recently moved to a new city, so I made sure that I updated my address in the voter registration rolls. I'm going to get my ballot. I'm going to fill it out probably in partnership with my husband. We're geeks and like to Google everything and do like fun video chats with our friends where we talk through ballot propositions. And then if I were left to my own devices, I would sit with it on my desk until election day, and then I would at the last minute turn it in. That's what I always end up doing. I always turn it in person, but because of the unique circumstances of this election, I'll be dropping it off by mail a few weeks in advance of election day. And I did want to note really quickly that even though you can't vote twice, you can't vote by mail and vote in person, what you can do regardless of where you live is request an absentee ballot, have it sent to you, and then decide, you know what, I don't want to fill that out, I want to vote in person instead. You always have that option. So what I'm encouraging everyone to do is at least request that mail ballot. And that way, if something comes up, if you wanted to vote in person, but you got COVID, or there's an outbreak in your community, or there's a natural disaster, which we've had a lot of this year, you still have that mail-in ballot that you can choose to use instead.
Fantastic advice. Charlotte, thank you for your time. Thank you for all of your smart takes on what's about to happen. This crew really enjoyed it. To the EDF and EDF Action teams that helped put this together, thank you so much. To the EDF folks that have joined us and continue to support our work, thank you, thank you, thank you. Remember, September 24th, 2 p.m. Eastern, we're going to do another one of these to talk a little bit about Get Out the Vote efforts. Please join us. And again, thank you all. Be safe. Take care.
Thank you.